Hi, my name is Michelle Carrillo, and this video will walk you through the way that conflict can be present in our workplaces and the best ways and tools that we can have in our toolbox to address it as efficient leaders and proactive leaders. Here's the thing. Leadership and conflict go hand in hand. Leadership is a full-on contact sport, and if you cannot or will not address conflict in a healthy, productive fashion, you should not be in a leadership role. The issues surrounding conflict resolution can best be summed up by adhering to the following ethos. Don't fear conflict, embrace it. It's your job. While you can try and avoid conflict, you cannot escape conflict. And to be able to bring swift and just resolution to conflict will serve you well as a leader. The inability to do so may actually be your downfall. Putting one's head in the sand and hoping that conflict will pass you by is not the most effective methodology in dealing with conflict. Conflict rarely resolves itself. In fact, conflict normally escalates if not dealt with proactively and properly. Thus, the need for proper conflict resolution is pivotal. Through decades of research, we have begun to grasp a better understanding for why conflict occurs and how to deal with it. Morton Deutsch was an American social psychologist and researcher in conflict resolution. He is known as one of the founding fathers of the field of conflict resolution. The main idea of Deutsch's inquiry into the resolution of conflict is the conditions that determine whether a conflict will be resolved in a constructive or destructive manner. He then mentions that there are 7 factors that affect the course of the conflict. The first is the characteristics of the parties, which would include their values and motivations. He then moves into how their prior relationship to one another, including their beliefs, social resources, strategy and tactics, power relationships, all play into the conflict itself. The third addresses the nature of the issue by giving rise to the conflict through its scope, rigidity, motivational significance, formulation. We then see the social environment within which the conflict occurs, including the facilities and restraints, encouragements and deterrents, social norms, institutional conflict, and the way that that plays a role. The 5th point he makes is the interested audiences in the conflict. This would include the relationships to the parties and to one another, their interests and their characteristics. Then, strategy and tactics employed by the parties play a role. This would include their legitimacy or illegitimacy, the use of positive and negative coercion, the use of incentives like promises and rewards or threats. We then see the consequences of the conflict as it affects each of the participants and other interested parties. This would include their immediate gains and losses, the precedents established, short-term effects, long-term effects, and the effects on their reputation in general. Along with these factors, Deutsch established a typology of conflicts. First is vertical conflict. Vertical conflict exists objectively and is perceived accurately. It is not contingent upon some easily altered feature of the environment. We then see contingent conflict. Contingent conflict is contingent upon an easily altered feature of the environment. Third is displaced conflict. Here we see parties are arguing about the wrong thing. Deutsch explains that the conflict being experienced in this specific type of conflict is being experienced as a manifest conflict. Frequently, the manifest conflict is a symbol of the underlying conflict, but it is a safer way to express what is going on than directly dealing with it, because that may be dangerous. We then see misattributed conflict. Here, conflict is between the wrong parties and over the wrong issues. Next is latent conflict. This is a conflict that should be occurring but is not. And finally, we have false conflict, where there was no objective for a conflict at all. This occurs when there's misperception or misunderstanding and can be easily cleared up with proper communication channels. Now that we have discovered the various aspects of conflict, we can focus on a tool used to address it. Developing effective conflict resolution skill sets is an essential component of building a sustainable business model. Unresolved conflict can lead to result in loss of productivity, the stifling of creativity, and the creation of barriers to cooperation and collaboration, all things that are necessary for a productive organization. Perhaps most importantly for leaders, good conflict resolution ability equals good employee retention. Leaders who don't deal with conflict will eventually watch their good talent walk out the door and search for a better and safer work environment. Because no two individuals have exactly the same expectations and desires, conflict is a natural part of our interactions with one another. This is where the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, or TKI for short, comes in. The TKI consists of 30 pairs of statements. For each pair, the respondent must choose either A or B. For example, one of these would depict collaborating, while the other would depict avoiding. Each pair of statements was specifically designed through a multi-stage research process to be equal in social desirability. So how does it work? The TKI begins by identifying two of the basic dimensions of the conflict behavior: assertiveness and cooperativeness. Assertiveness is the degree to which you try to satisfy your own concerns during a conflict. This is related to how you might try to meet your needs or receive support for your ideas. Next is cooperativeness. Cooperativeness is the degree to which you would try to satisfy the other individual's concerns. It's related to how you might try to help them meet their own goals and how you can be receptive to other individuals' ideas. The TKI assessment applies these to the 5 conflict handling modes. By applying the basic 2 dimensions of assertiveness and cooperativeness to the 5 conflict handling modes, you create the 5 major combinations possible in a conflict situation. They are as follows. Competing is assertive and uncooperative. In this mode, you try to satisfy your own concerns at the other person's expense. Collaborating is both assertive and cooperative. In this mode, you try to find a win-win solution that completely satisfies the concerns of both individuals involved. Compromising is intermediate in both assertiveness and cooperativeness. In this mode, you try to find an acceptable solution that only partially satisfies both individuals' concerns. Avoiding is both unassertive and uncooperative. In this mode, you work to sidestep the conflict without attempting to satisfy either individual's concerns. Finally, accommodating. This is unassertive and cooperative. In this mode, you try to satisfy the other person's concerns at the expense of your own. There is no single best way to handle conflict. Each of the 5 conflict handling modes has its own sets of benefits and negatives, and each can be highly effective if used properly in the right circumstance. The key to successfully utilizing each in conflict is based on knowing when to use each mode, and then having the skills to perform each mode well. The skill of your performance in each conflict handling mode relies on your ability to recognize the benefits of a mode while also being able to minimize its cost. The bottom line is that resolution can normally be found where people have the sincere desire to do so. In this way, you have all parties involved wanting to work towards a common cause and wanting to be able to work through the conflict. Turning the other cheek, compromise, forgiveness, compassion, empathy, honesty, finding common ground, these kinds of approaches towards resolving conflict will allow one to be successful in building rapport if the underlying desire is strong enough. Through the understanding of conflict as informed by Morton Deutsche and the use of an instrument like the TKI, we can prepare ourselves to best deal with conflict in all areas of our lives, not just the workplace. However, when all else fails and positional gaps cannot be closed, resolve the issue not by playing favorites, but by doing the right thing. After all, this is what we are called to do as leaders in our fields.